Welcome to Channel Security Secrets. I'm Lou Rabon. On this show, we expose the untold secrets and critical insights from the people shaping the future of cybersecurity sales in the Trusted Advisor channel. If you're looking to up your game around selling security, stick around. Channel Security Secrets is brought to you by Cyber Defense Group, on a mission to shift cybersecurity from reactive to resilient. Hi, everyone. I'm pumped to chat with our guest today. He's a former CIA and NSA cybersecurity leader, published author, keynote speaker, educator, and creator of the OWASP Threat and Safeguard Matrix. He's built an impressive career spanning the CIA, NSA, Federal Reserve Board, Capital One, and Caterpillar Financial, earning recognition as a trusted expert in the cybersecurity leadership, risk management, and security strategy. Today, he's the CEO of Clear Capabilities, co-host of CISO Tradecraft, and a leading voice in cybersecurity. Really stoked to speak to you. Welcome, Ross Young, to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on today, Lou. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited to chat and honored to have you on here. So, Ross, what would you consider to be the biggest secret to your success in the cybersecurity industry?
I think the biggest thing for me is a desire to learn how things work. I think with anything, you come in, you're a little bit stupid, and you're like, how does that work? Why do people do these things? How can I, circumvent this? And then you just start querying, maybe you start with talking to people, maybe you start with talking to Claude or Gemini these days, and you start trying to figure out how things work. Right. So if I don't understand how MCPs work, I start trying to read about that. And then what you find is while everybody else is going home watching TV or having fun at the baseball games, the more you learn about a topic, the smarter you get. And then before you know it, you become an expert in certain topics.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Don't you think that that's one of the key indicators for a successful cybersecurity professional is curiosity?
I really think so. It's about where do you find the greatest passions in your life? Because there's a difference between someone who comes in and does a 40-hour a week job and leaves. And then there's the people who you can just tell they're like writing code on the weekends, eating, sleeping, breathing this thing. And it doesn't mean you can't have hobbies outside of work. I mean, maybe you really enjoy cooking and barbecuing, then that's not really related to cyber. But the people who spend more time educating themselves, learning, and you just see that it's a passion for them, they're just going to become smarter because it's kind of like Kobe Bryant. He would go and he would practice basketball 3 times a day, and the other players might only go to practice once a day. And over a course of 10 years, 3 times more practice means you're probably a 3 times better player.
Oh yeah, it's like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing. But it's also funny because you're mentioning barbecues. Often when I have people saying, "Hey, I want to get into cyber, you can make a lot of money that way," and I'm like, "Well, what's your home lab look like?" To your point, I'm like, "What are you doing on the weekends? How much do you know about this industry, and what research have you done?" And if they come up with not a lot, I'm like, you can make a lot of money barbecuing and create, chicken wings, and really make a fortune if you're passionate about it. So I think the passion is really important. What about people that are, this is aimed, the audience is often channel people that are in this trusted advisor channel. They're trying to sell into a lot of these companies. How can they kind of get up and running if they're not really technical? They're curious about cybersecurity, but they don't really know where to begin. Like where do you tell people to kind of start to educate themselves?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is to start with maybe some books and some podcasts. Hey, I don't know how to program. I don't know anything about cybersecurity. Well, what is it most cybersecurity experts actually do? They might start with something like a Security Plus certification. And that could be a $30 book you could go on buy on Amazon and read that and just learn how security works. Or, maybe you go and you listen to some basic podcasts that kind of explore the topic or take like a $20 Udemy course, right? To gain a skill set in that. And it doesn't mean you actually have to then be able to program. But if you just listen to, a 20-hour course on something of this topic, you're going to get a little bit smarter, right? And I think that's the key, to just to know enough that you can ask the right questions, and then that is the most important step to really gain.
Yeah, I think asking the right questions is the right the right approach. Sometimes I think salespeople might get a little bit concerned because if they start to get out of their depth, then they're like, well, wait a second, I'm actually not an expert. I just know enough to get myself into trouble. But that's where they can pull in, sales engineers and things like that. You've had a storied career in cyber, and you're continuing to push the envelope. What are you seeing out there that company? Obviously, we're going to hit on AI because we have to, but what are you seeing out there in the industry that you think are some trends that people are not yet aware of?
So I'll just start with, everybody knows that vulnerabilities is going to be much more important to have a great vulnerability management program and a patch management program. If you just look at the latest Verizon data breach report, you're going to see that, exploitation of public facing vulnerabilities is now the number one attack sector. And I think that's really important to say, oh yeah, we got to go stop all those mythos related attacks. I get that. But I think the more tangible piece is, how do we take our program that's really been patching in 30 or 60 days and get it to patching in hours? Like, how do we actually do that? And are we actually going to change the priorities in this company? Because historically we said we're shipping features. And what if all of a sudden we're saying, hey, wait, the risk is too high. We're actually going to delay a product release in order to patch these 200 vulnerabilities that just came out from Microsoft yesterday, right?
That takes a huge commitment from the C-suite to say, we may be pausing on revenue initiatives so we can make the product more secure. The challenge is, especially you speak to a lot of CISOs, how do they convey that to the C-suite because if the C-suite doesn't get it, you're, banging your head against the wall. So do you have any tips on maybe conveying that message? Obviously, risk is one.
I think we need to change the culture from, hey, security is a nice to have, to how is it a paved path road? And I'll just give you the example. If today we go in and we say, hey, we're just going to send all the app teams, here's how many vulnerabilities you have in your tools, that's a very retroactive approach. Versus if we say, hey, wait, in their CI/CD pipelines, when they're pushing code out the door, we actually block their code from going out. And if they need to go out with vulnerabilities, it's a manual approval by an executive. That's a very different type of an approach. And I think that's a very focused approach where you're going to get into those hour type cycles. Now you're going to get pushback, right? The first time that month and people are seeing their stuff is delayed, there's going to be a lot of issues. But then over time, what happens is the culture is going to start to adopt those practices, right? That person who's submitting all of these vulnerabilities to their manager is going to say, don't make me sign this. No, you go back and you fix it. I'm not taking responsibility for this. Why did you try to push bad code in the beginning? And so now they're going to be like, oh crap, I can't actually send this to the manager for approvals. I actually got to go fix it, right? And then that manager is starting to hold them more accountable. And so I think little things like that it takes time. It's not something you're going to do overnight, but you have to be able to say, like, look, we're going to push quality control and we're not going to allow bad things to come out of our CI/CD pipelines. This is the new norm.
Yeah, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. But I still have issues. A day to day. I'm having these conversations, and it really depends on who the executive is at the top. If this is being pushed from the top, that security is important, and we're going to do what it takes, even if it means that it's going to slow some things down. I don't often hear that. I often get, listen, I believe my CTO. He's vibe coding. I know that there's a bunch of vulnerabilities, but he told me all the Claude code, all the MD markdown files are putting the right guardrails on them, and I trust him. So I'm just going to go with that because I don't want to slow things down.
And I think the other thing too is it's gotten a lot easier. Like, yes, Claude and Mythos can find ways to hack into companies, but it can also find ways to secure your code. So historically, if I had 200 vulnerabilities and each vulnerability took me an hour to write the code fix, that's 200 hours. I didn't have 5 weeks I could take off work to do that. But if I can fix 200 vulnerabilities in 10 minutes because Claude can rewrite my code to solve those vulns, that's a very different patch time frame, right? And I don't think there's any person who would say, "Yeah, 10 minutes, yeah, just work through your lunch break and fix the code," right? So I think that reality is also changing for us in a positive way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's changing the equation on both ends, and I just my concern is with the validation because there are such things as hallucinations. You can't just trust that if it does the fixes, and especially now, we used to have a small team of or whatever. There was a subset of the company of any organization that had DevOps and coding. Now the entire company is coding, including the marketing department and people that have never even understood or seen what normal code does. And therefore, you've got a much larger attack surface. So, how do you address those kind of outside the CI/CD pipeline, conversations for people that are just pushing code outside normal departments?
Well, I think we have to go back and make it easy for them to do the right things, right? If we say, hey, in order to write code, you need to have a GitHub account where you can actually store your code. That makes sense. That's kind of obvious. And because we don't want to have to chase down 200 places of where code could be stored, how do we make it super easy for them to store code in one place? And then if they actually start to put code into GitHub, how do we bake our controls into that place where you can't even merge code in the production branch or master branch without having these quality gates and checks there? I think that that's a big piece of just making it easier and helping people. And when I used to lead, the DevOps organization at CIA, we used to have great training programs that would help people. And so it wasn't just, hey, onboard into the tool. It was, hey, we're going to have a week long training where we're actually going to take time, and anybody's welcome to take this from the team who does, these different types of tools. And we're happy to, show you how to use it in the most effective way. And that really ramped up our adoption, right? If we had Jenkins or other tools and somebody, took a Jenkins class from us, instead of maybe just 10% of developers, we'd get to 50% of developers using this tool. And so I think we have to really do a lot on free training. And then the other piece that I'll say is maybe the forgotten stepchild is it's one thing to do security scans and say, hey, here's all the things that are broken. But the most important thing is you actually have quality control tests. Like if I push all these changes, did my code break or does it still work? And that quality control tests, I think is what people tend to like downplay, that you don't really have a large department helping people doing quality controls and tests. But here's the most important thing. If you knew that your code was going to go forward because it passed all the quality control tests, you'd probably patch a lot faster knowing that that stuff didn't break anything. So I think that's like maybe a piece forgotten out of cybersecurity, and it's a program often cut when budgets are lower than normal because we had a bad year. But that really is an accelerant for cyber.
Yeah, QC, QA, absolutely, and that's something also that I think AI can totally help with. That's something where you can say, yeah, here are your 240 tests or whatever. If it doesn't pass one of these, stop, let us, and it's all the functionality. So that makes a lot of sense. I like that. And the training part is really interesting too that you mentioned because it's almost like the more training someone undergoes, maybe the deeper access they get to sensitive information, et cetera. So hey, you're welcome to code, but you're in this dirty sandbox that doesn't touch anything. But once you've proven to us, the cyber department that you're actually learning and practicing what we're telling you to do, then you can get access to more and deeper information, more sensitive stuff.
Yeah, I actually talk about this in my book in one of my chapters. It's the developer driver's license is what I call it. And you just think about, hey, before we let somebody use a forklift in a company, they have to be, forklift certified. But before someone's allowed to push code to production, what requirements do they have to go through? How did we actually teach them how to ship secure code in our company? And I think you're going to find like that's a massive gap. And then at the end of the day, like, how can we hold them accountable when they don't even know how to do it? And it's because we failed to train them. Like, we need to build something. And if you look at like how we teach 16-year-old kids to drive, well, what do? We make them pass some type of a written exam. Afterwards, they have to do some type of, let's call it mentoring shadowing, where they're, driving with a permit while you have a authorized driver beside them for, how many hours. And then afterwards, then they do a driving exam by themselves to pass, right? How do we do that? How do we turn that into a 1 week class that when anybody says, hey, we're going to grant them, developer privileges in this company, they can now push code, they have access to GitHub and everything else. Well, they have to take that 1 week class in order to get that approval.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea. I love that. And the book, yeah, I mean, before we go into the book, I want to speak about this is all going back to governance. So you can't really push this stuff if you don't have an overall strategy and governance. So I think that that's the message for anyone listening that might be on the sales side. That's like, okay, this is kind of in the weeds. What does this all mean to me? As a salesperson, you want to make sure that when you're listening for opportunities, you're like, do you have a governance program? Is there some way that you put guardrails around these developers to make sure that they're not pushing insecure code and then creating risk and downtime, potential downtime? But let's talk about this book has recently come out, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote it and released it in November, so it's been out. Oh, let's call that 7 months there. But it's been a different book that we just haven't seen in the cybersecurity space. There's a lot of things that teach you how to hack, teach you about AI, but who's teaching you how to save millions of dollars and maximize every dollar spent in your cybersecurity program? That was really the focus for the book.
This is a relevant topic to this audience because trying to get budget, that's especially, yeah, that's the biggest challenge. So what are, kind of maybe the top three takeaways that from the book, but and without giving any spoilers, because everyone needs to go out and buy it and read it too.
Yeah, so the first thing I tell people, which is kind of my catchy term, is cybersecurity murder board, which is how do you prove the effectiveness of your tools? Because you're probably overpaying and not getting the full value out of what you have today. And so what I like to do on any tool is look at two metrics. One is called a coverage metric and one is called a utilization metric. And so just think about if you have a web application firewall, right? Is it in front of 100% of your web applications or only 50% of your web applications? That would be a coverage metric. And then a utilization is how many of the important features have you turned on? Think about you might have the OWASP top 10 web applications and you have things like SQL injection, cross site scripting. Did you actually turn some of those rules off because it broke the application versus fixing your application? And so what happens is we turn off, these rules and we don't deploy it all everywhere. And so now you have something that's deployed 70% across the organization and, maybe only 50% of the features are turned on. So when you multiply those together, the coverage and utilization, you get 35% of what I call an effective protection score on that technology. And how I like to, compare that from every one of my tools. How am I on DLP? How am I on EDR? How am I on all these things? And I start to understand where I'm badly deployed and badly configured. And then I get to have some conversations to say, wow, this tool really sucks. Are we going to get rid of it? Are we going to actually fix it and deploy it better? What are we going to do here to actually make it work in this company? And a lot of times I can find that there's these tools that we're just paying, money for because we've done it for 10 years and it's not the right tool anymore, right? It's the tool that we could probably drop. And now I have new money to fund, my other programs like an AI governance program in 2026, right?
Huge. Yeah. Tool rationalization is enormous. I love that methodology too. Actually, we need to adopt that ourselves with our clients because, yeah, there's so many. The tool sprawl is real. And I think that that's one of the, myths of cybersecurity or or maybe the deep, ugly secrets, which is throwing money at tools has not solved the problem. Obviously.
Yeah. Another one that I really like to about is maintenance fees. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite tools that I don't see a lot of people talking about is probably very boring is time cards. So I like to look at a time card to say, hey, out of all of our developers, what percent of their time is adding new features versus what percent of their time is just, keeping the servers up and alive? I call that operations and maintenance. And if you figure out that, hey, here's a team where 90% of their time is spent on maintenance activities, that's kind of like a sunk cost. Yes, you got to keep the app alive, but how do we get to version 2.0 where instead of having 90% maintenance fees, we have 30% maintenance, fees on this application? And now if you think about it, just doing that, if you had 10 people and you could, go from 90% to 60%, you could repurpose 6 headcount to do something very powerful, building new tools, adding more features, doing something else. So identifying those, let's call it wasted activities of heavy maintenance, applications, that's another area I think is really, really powerful by looking at things like time cards.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think organizations are a bit resistant to that because they don't want the developers to feel micromanaged. And developers are very sensitive about certain topics. But I think keeping you could probably even do from understanding what their focus is on the screen, how much time they're spending on certain activities. But it's a great metric, I think, for the business overall. Any other learnings from the book that you'd like to share?
I'll just share that I think there's a lot that you can do with your MSPs and your VARs channels. That's another area that I just haven't heard a lot of people talk about. And so I give this example for CISOs that imagine you buy 50 products from 50 different vendors. Each of these vendors may have a 20 or 30% markup, and you're paying those costs associated with it. So a lot of times I tell companies to say, what if you had a strategic partner that said, I'm just going to give you a flat markup of 500K for all your tools instead of 20% on every one of your 50 tools? I mean, 500K is great for one person's salary to just manage your account and build that out. And now you're actually saving a lot of money because you might have spent 2 or 3 million dollars when you did that 20% on 50 different tools. So ways where you can partner with your strategic sales partner, I think are really interesting ways that you can save money that people just aren't thinking about.
That's great. Again, for this audience as well. Now, a lot of the VARs or anyone selling those tools is probably like, no, we count on that revenue every year. But I think that the industry is evolving for sure. We're seeing it where it's not. People want to have long-term relationships. Any seller that's just showing up transactionally at renewal time, saying, "Hey, here's your bill," and yeah, we marked it up even higher this year. They're not getting the long-term business because there's others that are offering value. I think the value is, yeah, listen, we won't make the money on the tools, but we'll make the money on the services, or we'll make the money on a longer term relationship with our clients. I think that makes a lot of sense. So tell me tell everyone the name of the book and where they can find it.
Yeah, so the name of the book is called Cybersecurity's Dirty Secret: Why Most Budgets Go to Waste. You can find it on Amazon. We have paperback, hardback, we have audibles. So if you have a terrible commute, you can listen to it while you're driving. It's a fun book that's out there. And then obviously, some of the templates in the book are actually on my website at CISOTradecraft.com. So if you look, you'll just find a free template section there where you can start to play with some of those things and use them. Like most people have never seen a cybersecurity budget as a free template or a murder board that you can just go and try, and it doesn't cost you any money to have fun with the free templates.
That's huge. Yeah, definitely. Are you seeing a lot of uptake? Are you tracking how many people are coming?
Yeah, yeah. So, we've seen thousands of folks really using these tools. I think it's really kind of nice. You just haven't seen people give away all of these things for free. Like I just know I couldn't find, What is everybody doing for board templates? What is everybody using for, some of their budget programs and other things? And I've just tried to open source that and help, the industry.
Yeah. Thank you for that, by the way. I think there's a lot of use for that. And I think also we're moving from maybe version 1.0 of the CISOs, which is the IT guy that was the only one that knew enough about security to get the title, and then just somebody to have the title just so they can hold the bag when there's something wrong, which is like V2.0 to V3.0, which is really a true member of the executive team who's communicating to the board and speaking more than just the technical. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's consistent with how you look at the industry.
Yeah, I think it's the things that we learn that change our perception of the company, right? So, for example, in cybersecurity, you probably work a lot on endpoints. You probably work a lot on email, and so you think that's the things I really have to go and secure and focus on for the company. But at the end of the day, the chief revenue officer, the chief financial officer, that's table stakes. Like that stuff should just work. They're really worried about the CRM, the ERP system, the HR system going down. If those things are down, they can't work at all, right? And so now it's, 100 salespeople can't do anything when the CRM is down, right? And so that is that shift of how do we figure out what are the critical business processes where we make 80% of the money for this company? What are the IT tools behind those that need to work? And then that's where I need to put my security, right? Because that is harming 80% of the revenue of the company when it's at risk.
Yeah, it's you work for the CIA. There's also the confidentiality, integrity, and availability CIA, which both IT and there's overlap with IT and security for sure. So, what about we've got this evolution towards AI. We've got a larger attack surface. We do have it's a cat and mouse game, so there is also the ability to discover those vulnerabilities. I think recently there was like a 29-year-old vulnerability found in an open source tool that's just been closed, and so it is offering some good for us. The AI kind of revolution that we're looking at. But how do you feel? What do you think is a cybersecurity defender is going to be look like in 5 years and 10 years? Is it going to be this just completely augmented AI augmented controlling a bunch of agents, or is it going to be kind of more of the same today, just a slight kind of bump?
I actually do like this more agent approach. And I'll give the example. Sometime 25 years ago, it became the norm that everybody had to know how to use PowerPoint, Word, Excel in an organization. I think in 2028, everybody needs to know how to build an agent. I think that is just going to become such a standard thing. And so what's going to happen is you don't have people in marketing, writing marketing documents from scratch. They're writing marketing agents that are actually going to automate their marketing work for them. That's a marketing person, right? And that skill of being able to write and automate your work in every type of job, I think is just going to be more and more important. And the reason why we all have to learn how to write agents is two key things: scale and speed, right? At the end of the day, you know, I can't respond to 10 million users or 10 million alerts or 10 million incidents or whatever it is. The only thing that can scale that is an agent. And then the second thing is timeliness. If I'm in cybersecurity, I probably don't want to work more than 50 hours a week. And at the same time, we know our adversaries are not sleeping. They're going to attack us during our lunch breaks. They're going to attack us on our weekends. They're going to attack us on all these inconvenient times. And if I have an agent that says, if you see this, then do this, that's super effective. It responds in milliseconds, right? And I cannot fight ransomware by manually clicking things the way that I used to do. It is just too fast that I'm going to have to write with automation and scripts. So I think this world of requiring people to understand how to build agents is really the future, not just for cyber, but I would say every career in the workplace.
That's a great kind of segue into the market for looking for talent. I think everyone that's afraid of AI taking their jobs, it's no, and this has been talked about multiple times. It's not AI that's going to take your job. It's the person that knows how to use AI that'll take your job. So it's taking the kind of the middle mediocre layer out of it and giving power to people that actually know how to use this stuff.
Yeah, and I'll date myself. When I first started driving in the mid '90s, you had to, try to do maps, and you'd have to go buy a Randy McNeely map to figure out how to get across town if you didn't know how to get across a big city, right? And now, you had later inventions like MapQuest and Garmin, but everybody really has like Google Maps on their phone or Apple Maps. Uh, and you just drive that way. No one is going back to, let me look things up on a map, right? That is, those days are just gone. Uh, and I think that's the way of where we're going to go, right? The manually doing things is going to be replaced by the Google Maps or the building your own agents.
Yeah, that's a great point. So any parting thoughts here for anyone that's listening as to again, they're trying to have these conversations. They may not be as deep in cyber as they'd like. Any kind of parting wisdom for them.
I'll tell everybody, and this is going to sound very self-serving. You need to read my book, Cybersecurity's Dirty Secret: Why Most Budgets Go to Waste. It was not written for a technical audience. And one of the things that I have heard from dozens of folks is, hey, I think you actually wrote this book for sales folks. And that was an audience I had no idea I was writing to. I was writing to the directors and the CISOs of how to improve their programs. But what happens is when you have a salesperson who's never really been in cyber, they read that book, they get the insights and that perspective of what a CISO is trying to do. How do they build the programs? How do they run effectively? That gives them really powerful skills to understand how to sell into those organizations, how to do the master service license agreement, all of these things to really help those CISOs. And I think that's a really powerful read for those folks.
That's huge. So yeah, everyone go out and get the book. And we are really, really pleased, Ross. Thank you for coming on the show to share your insights and help out all those struggling salespeople that are going to definitely benefit from reading the book.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And, thanks again. And if this helps anyone, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, Ross Young.
Yes, absolutely. Check out Ross's book. Check out Ross on LinkedIn, please. And thanks everyone for watching and or listening. If you learned something new, or hopefully you learned a lot today, please tell someone about the podcast. Thanks again, Ross. And this has been another exciting episode of Channel Security Secrets. See you next time. That's a wrap for this episode of Channel Security Secrets. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes, guest info, and more episodes, visit us at channelsecuritysecrets.com. Channel Security Secrets is sponsored by Cyber Defense Group. When it comes to protecting your business, don't settle for reactive. Partner with experts who build resilience from the ground up.